Hi everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Chloe. I'm a new voice over the phone. I'm the new capability building coordinator for Connecting Up and TechSoup New Zealand, as Tina heads off on maternity leave this week. Connecting Up is a part of the Info Exchange group, and Info Exchange is a not-for-profit social enterprise that has delivered technology for social justice for over 25 years now. With over 100 staff across Australia and New Zealand, we tackle the biggest social challenges through the smart and creative use of technology. I would like to welcome you to the webinar, Key Security Measures for Not-for-Profits Implementing Remote Work, which will be presented by Conan Daly from the IT team. Now, before we begin today, we'll start with a little bit of housekeeping. All lines are muted, so if you do have any technical issues, please type it into the questions box on your webinar panel and I'll be able to assist you. If you have any questions during the session, please also type it into the questions box and Conan will answer them in the Q&A section at the end of the webinar. Please note that your comments and questions will not appear to the entire group. If you're on a Wi-Fi connection and have multiple programs open, this can sometimes affect the quality of the audio and the video of the webinar. So if possible, please close all other programs to help you have the best experience. Please note that this webinar is being recorded and a link to the recording and the slides will be sent to you as soon as we can after the webinar ends. Before we start, I'd also like to remind you there'll be a short survey at the end of the webinar. We would appreciate it if you could take a few minutes to provide us with your feedback from today. And that's all from me. So I'll pass it over to the wonderful Conan to get things started today.
Excuse me. Thank you very much, Chloe, and of course, thank you, Tina, for your help over the last however long we've been doing these, several months, and hope it goes well on maternity leave. I'm sure I'll speak to you just before I leave, but yeah, do hope it goes well. Thanks to all the attendees today. Really hope you get to take something good out of this. It's obviously interesting times in security. Unfortunately, the people that are trying to create havoc for us do not stop. And so it is important that we cover off this type of, I guess, content even during a pandemic situation we're all kind of trying to get by with working from home. So it's going to be quite a broad webinar today, but I hope that depending on whether you are a bit new to trying to understand the security, the IT security space, or if you have quite a bit of knowledge and experience, you should be able to take something away. That's our intent anyway. So yeah, there should be something for everyone. And please, of course, there'll be questions at the end, and I'm happy to try and answer all type of questions. So just feel free to give me some hard ones. So to start off with, we have a poll that we wanted to put up, and this is anonymous. We won't see who's doing what, so don't feel embarrassed about what you might have to state, but we're trying to get a gauge on what the audience is so we can cater some of the, I guess, a bit more of the content and the amount of things we highlight during the presentation. So feel free to go with poll number 1 when you're ready. Cool. So it's good. It's a good mix. So we don't have too many experts that are going to be sitting here armchair critiquing my content, which is cool, which is usually fair as well. We've got quite a few on the moderate, know what to look out for area, which I think this is, should have some really good content for some of the things you will have seen before, and some of the things might be new to you, I hope. And some that are in the know very little category. And rest assured, we will try and explain things, the foundations of IT security. So yeah, thank you very much for that. Let's box on, Chloe. Cool. Okay, so what we will cover today. So we're going to be talking about the importance of security and a few facts and figures about the IT security space, an overview of the variety of threats. This is quite important because while remote working is the heart of this, and I guess the unique element to what is going on in IT security at the moment, we still need to go over the foundations. We still need to cover things like phishing and what it means and what examples there are to help and then discuss what remote working has changed. So we will be going over the variety of threats and I guess their relevance in 2020. Some real life examples that we have experienced and we've found as well on the internet that hopefully will help you understand the types of things to look out for. How remote working affects it, of course, as I mentioned before, some protection measures you need to take and how you can get started. And we're kind of going to give you the shortcuts that we're sort of talking to our customers about. If you have to focus on one or two things, this is what you should focus on. And everything's refutable. Your IT provider, if you have one, might have a different opinion, but hopefully you can sort of potentially ask them about what we're suggesting and maybe challenge some things. And then some training options for your team. So just a little bit about the IT team. We won't go into too much on this. Some of you may have seen this a few times before if you've attended some of our webinars, but been around for almost 10 years, big in the Office 365 space. We do IT support, which is basically anything that plugs in and turns on these days. We have a wide range of IT services as well, basically any type of backup, internet, email, servers, everything really we can provide. We've got a major not-for-profit base, which is the largest, type of industry we work with, which is why we're here today. And we provide IT services in New Zealand and Australian organisations. Cool. So just cracking right in. A few facts on security. It is, I won't read all of these, but it is a big industry. If you weren't thinking about the moral and ethical side of things, if you were to be looking for an industry that is on the up and up as far as the financial takings, cybercrime would be it. It is huge. There's a lot of money going in, and traditional organized crime is starting to tap into this area as a way to get money, which is a bit of a shame. And also terrorists, you may have heard before, are often getting their funding from some of these types of breaches that we're going to be talking about soon. A few key things in there. This data is a little bit dated, but 30% of organizations have experienced a ransomware attack over the past year. That was probably 2018 to 2019. 20% of organizations encountered a CEO fraud attack, which is pretty big. And the average age of a typical cyber criminal is 17, which probably doesn't surprise anyone, but it's a little bit annoying. Some major breaches, just a few in here. Yahoo had a very big breach a few years ago, several billion records. eBay have had one. Ashley Madison, some may have heard of that one. That was not about records, but a huge amount of data was taken out of that organization. Feel free to Google it if you haven't heard of it. But there are some huge amount of records, which we're going to be covering a bit later, that have been stolen about, everyday users like yourselves that have personal accounts in some of these systems. So jumping into, I guess, why is security important? As I said at the beginning, we are kind of laying the foundations here. And some of this may be obvious to you, but the data is valuable. It's not just about the money. So in the last 10 years, there was a move. So just going over where security has sort of originated, the IT threats. In the 1990s and 2000s, it was about the people that were creating viruses and malicious software, which is the type of cyber threats of that day. It generally was about chaos. They wanted to get their reputation in their communities up by creating something that would have destructive, that would create destruction amongst organizations and individuals. It wasn't until the late 2000s that the financial side became a thing. And there was, of course, examples earlier on, but en masse, the money became something obtainable. So, but in the last 5+ years, the value of data has become a thing that has, I guess, changed again. So hackers are no longer trying to go after something that will then lead to the ability to get money, although sometimes that's the case. They're often just going for information that they can sell. So health records, which a lot of not-for-profits, social services and health records about individuals that a lot of not-for-profits may have access to directly or indirectly, are a very valuable commodity in the, I guess, the cybercrime area. Few of the consequences of a breach, just if you're thinking that maybe your data is not as much of a threat. When I'm saying that, I mean if you had a major breach, would an organization you interact with, or maybe a government organization, look on that, they might look on that unfavorably, but other consequences would be the productivity impact. When you have a major breach, it slows your organization down. There's a financial impact, particularly if money is stolen, and then there's the reputational impact. Spamming out emails that are infecting your contacts, network, customers, clients, etc., is always going to have a reputational impact, particularly if maybe you interact with a government organization, a health ministry, social services, and they are receiving notifications that you've been breached. It can be pretty serious. And then the other thing is, one breach likely leads to a further breach. So many of you may have seen or even fallen victim to a minor phishing attack, and we'll come back to that shortly. Often those minor phishing attacks are actually the entry point for a later breach. Now, what you will find is if you have fallen victim to those, you'll be targeted and you'll just get more and more and more, and that can be a challenge. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go through some common threats. Some of these may seem simple to you. We're going to go through some examples as well as we go through. But you know, this is trying to refresh the types of threats that are out there, and I'm going to talk about which ones you really need to keep an eye on. So phishing. Everyone's probably heard of phishing. That's phishing with a PH. It's not anything new, but I need to make sure it's clear, just in case you haven't heard this before. Phishing and the various types of phishing, and there's spear phishing, whaling. These are all really cool names that I certainly wouldn't have come up with, but they are what the industry likes to use. But phishing is by far the most likely, most commonly used breach attempt, and the most successful that is out there amongst cybercrime enthusiasts, I guess you'd call them, at the moment. So you are more likely to be impacted by phishing and receive requests for phishing. It is the darling, and it's going to keep happening. And the reason is that it's not going to get picked up generally by an antivirus, because it's not a virus. It's a form of social engineering, really. So the definition, or a definition, is sending emails imitating reputable companies to induce individuals to reveal personal information such as passwords or credit card numbers. And the passwords thing is the common one. And this is what's going to happen. And it does have a high success likelihood compared to other types of breaches. So phishing is big in the 2016 to 2020 timeframe. Ransomware was prior to that, but obviously still exists. An example of phishing, this is not a great example, and hopefully it's easy to pick up if you're using Office 365, which I suspect a lot of organizations are using. This would be an example. So it's when you have a fake address, blocked it out, sending a message to myself, for example, with an email that is trying to imitate something like Office 365, and you can receive, I'm sure if you're using Office 365, you sometimes receive emails from the system, and if you click here, it is going to, or there, it is going to a fake website that is going to attempt to get you to plug in your username and password, and then they have that, and they can access your actual Office 365 account and do things with it. And then another example would be, which is a similar one, there's an email here with an attachment from Apple ID. I'm sure if any of you have an Apple account, you do receive somewhat random Apple ID emails. So this is why these things are targeted. What's inside the PDF is not a virus, it's not anything bad, but it is a link to click, which then takes you to a place which is a fake version of your Apple ID to try and get your Apple ID. Is it okay, Chloe, if we put up our next poll, please? Just going to do a little bit of a poll on phishing, just to get an idea of how many of you might have fallen victim to a phishing scam. I have. Maybe I shouldn't say that, but once upon a time, I fell victim to one of these, and I was surprised I did, because I went back and looked at it and thought, that's pretty obvious, but I wasn't concentrating when I typed in my details. It was my personal information, personal email address, but it was still a bit frustrating. Okay. Oh, look at that. Well, I'm very pleased that people have been honest, which is good. So we've got yes, we've got no, and we've got have seen them but never fallen for them. So I guess you'd say that 2/3 haven't, or more than 2/3 haven't fallen victim, but you know, a third-ish, slightly less than a third, has fallen victim. Look, it's very easy to fall victim. Sometimes people don't even know they have fallen victim. Not casting doubt on any of these numbers, but it's possible that people do it and then just keep on their merry way. And sometimes the impact doesn't actually become known. But it's important to highlight that these do happen, and sometimes all that we notice is that the most common phishing attempt of the day is you get an email from someone you know that asks you to click on an Office 365 login link. Generally, it is. And it's from a legitimate source. So the person that's sending it to you is one of your contacts. You click on it, it then uses, you click on it, you log in, it then spams that same message out to your contact list. And usually you realize you're a bit embarrassed, you send an apology to your contacts, whoopsie, didn't mean to do that, reset your password and go on your merry way. What people often don't realize is that there are hooks that have been inserted into your Office 365 user account that can actually be used for later damage. What we find is sometimes we're coming along to customers when we're taking on new customers, and we find that they have fallen victim to a phishing attempt, and there's been rules that have been put in place in Office 365 to forward financial documents from banks. So ANZ, who else is ASB? I'm trying to think of Australian banks. The Bank of Australia. So they would forward any messages from them to a hacker in Africa or wherever, and and that is because they want to try and use that later on. So this is something that still happens, and people believe they've just fallen in the trap of some chain situation that is embarrassing but not actually harmful. But sometimes they're very wrong about that. Okay, just continuing on. So at the moment, we are having COVID-19 phishing. So they're using COVID-themed phishing emails, sometimes with infected attachments, talking about safety measures and testing. The link, a common one that has been going around, is the link apparently contains health information, but it installs malicious software on the device that's designed to steal information. They're getting a bit more clamped down on now, but this was a big thing in sort of early April. One example was the World Health Organization. A fake phishing attempt was attempting to send you to it was imitating a real example of a donation campaign that was going on, and it was trying to donate to a response fund for the World Health Organization, and it wasn't. It was going to scammers, and it was a fake. Hopefully no one in this list actually did donate information to a fake World Health Organization, but maybe they have. Another example, and this is kind of to help you spot them, is this was a CDC one, obviously that's the United States, that apart from what's going on up here, if you can see that, is up the top in the from address, is quite legitimate looking. If it had a name in the dear area, you could read this and assume, or glance at it and assume that it is quite legitimate. The thing is, there was a link there, as you can see, that it appears that the link has www.cdc.gov, which is a legitimate address. But if you hover over that, you actually find the link at the bottom that we pointed to is the real link, which is a dodgy, bad location. And it is going to be taking you somewhere that you don't want to go, either to grab information or download software. So this is what phishing is. There's lots of things disguised in the email. They're trying to get you to believe that the email is legit and then do things from there. A few other examples of things that are going on at the moment. So in Australia, there's COVID-19 themed scam text messages. So this is an example. Hopefully some of you received this and ignored it, or haven't received it. Something around there's COVID symptoms and where to get tested in your area. So this is something that was in March, but they are still happening. Another example is coronavirus maps. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't go to coronavirus maps, but in late March, there was a map application that a lot of people were downloading that was dodgy, and it effectively seemed real. It was about data, and a lot of us are interested in finding out where the hotspots were, but it was designed to steal sensitive information and passwords. So Yeah, I guess generally this type of email would come through as a phishing attempt and be downloaded onto your machine. And I hope that if you've got a, you will have some sort of malware software, as in malicious software, anti-malware software, I should say, on your computer. And by now it should be clearing any of the stuff off. Some potential fixes or potential remedies that you can take around phishing. We believe the largest is user education. So multi-factor authentication is a very powerful tool. You may have heard of MFA, 2FA, but multi-factor authentication is what it is. It's when there's two versions of authentication. So you have your password, and then you'll receive a text message, or you'll have to use your app to authenticate. This is a very big benefit to your security and your protection against phishing, because if you fall victim to the phishing attempt and enter your password or your account in there, the MFA will block them from using your password to access. So it's very, very powerful. Additionally, good mail filtering systems, and Office 365 has some built in, and you can get additional layers within Office 365 to help it. Another example we suggest is DNS filtering. There's a tool called Cisco Umbrella, or the Open DNS is part of Cisco Umbrella effectively, or another name for it. These are quite powerful tools. Now we have a summary of these at the end, but this is a couple of examples. But the first one, and I touched on it lightly, user education is one of the more powerful ways that you can help, because it is about, you know, some of these other systems are to stop if you do fall victim, rather than trying to prevent you from falling victim, and that's where the education comes into account. One poll that we neglected to do, Chloe, my fault, I accidentally missed the second poll. Are you able to put that up now? Slightly out of order. Yes, here we go. So this is just we were meant to go with our statistics slides, but very interested to know if the people on this call have cyber insurance. It's anonymous, of course, by the way, and this information will not be given to any insurance provider or anything like that. But it is interesting to know, and I can talk a little bit about cyber insurance based on our experience as well. So it's good that no one ticked our organization does not require it, because I guess that's, well, optimistic. So quite a few people have it, and then there's the majority, though, either don't have it or don't know anything about it. And I'll talk a little bit later about cyber insurance. Really, cyber insurance is becoming more expensive, because it's a thing of recent times, but it can be we have found. And the thing is that we're an IT company that's trying to prevent the need for cyber insurance. But we have found that like other, I guess, securities that you'd have on your physical building, you're going to put up a security alarm, but if someone steals things, you still want insurance to be able to compensate yourselves for that situation. It's like the last line of defense. And it could be, and I'll talk a little bit more about it later, but it can be something you could consider. Okay, continuing on. Oh, sorry, Chloe, if you could read that one. So spear phishing or whaling. So this is when the hackers are going after someone specifically in your organization or in an organization. So usually it's the CEO or the finance manager. They've effectively determined that this person is valuable and they are targeting someone. So when this happens, it's a bit more curated. They've written it specifically based on what they know about your organization or that person, and they tend to be a little bit more successful in a way. So they're the same as phishing. They're email scans, but they're harder to spot than phishing. They often look like they're coming from someone within the company. So they're trying to make the CEO of a company believe that the financial controller or the finance manager, or the admin that's in charge of the money is communicating with them, or more likely the other way around. They're trying to make the finance manager or the office admin that's controlling a lot of the banking or has access to the banking to believe that the CEO is or the general manager or whatever, the head of the company is communicating with them. They're often trying to get access to financial information or push forward a payment. And sometimes the starting point is a traditional phishing attempt and it moves to this. So a very simple example, a very basic one, and I'm going to go into a more detailed one, would be this one here. So this is a couple of staff in our office. We've used this as an example. Gina is our financial controller at the IT team, and Sue is the CEO. And so Gina has received a message saying, "You have not received my previous email." And this is a common first example because it usually kickstarts a conversation. Now, if you were to look at the email, and often in Outlook you might not, you would see that it's actually from an email that is not at the IT team. And so this is how they do it. They make it look like the real person that's in the company, and but it's actually a false email. So this is an example that's a little bit more elaborate and just taking you through what can happen and how this works. And I'll try and go through it quickly, but also with a bit of description for those that may not have seen one of these before. So CEO fraud, I guess that's the terminology. So here we have John Smith emailing Susan Brown. Now, John Smith, I need to say, John Smith is not a real person. That is the hacker. But John Smith is the CEO of this company, Company X, we'll call them. Susan Brown is as you can see with the title of the next, she's the office admin. She's in charge of the money. So an email has been generated saying, "Are you available to handle an international payment today? Have one pending. Let me know the bank details." So it's concealed because that's often how it works in Outlook, the emails, and now Outlook is getting better at showcasing them, but often back in the day, or not even that long ago, you wouldn't be able to see what the email was, you just see who. And so someone is being an imposter to John Smith, who is the legitimate CEO of the company, but this is a non-legitimate email. Next, Susan Brown receives it and she says, "Sorry, I don't know what you're talking about. Can I help?" Once the email has taken place, generally Susan will not realize she's in a conversation with someone fake because it's part of her email chain, and she's just going to keep responding. And so that's what the hackers often do. They want to start that first conversation. Can you still handle this right now? Was very busy earlier, from John. John is trying, or the fake John is trying to create a sense of urgency, and put a bit of pressure on Susan. And in a way, the hacker is taking advantage of the situation that often the office admin staff or financial controller are fearful of the CEOs, which is a bit of a shame, cultural thing, but that's part of the reason why these things work. So Susan then says back, "Can do this now if it will help." John says, "It seems to be a very busy day. I'm wanting to transfer 62,000. It's very late, but can you get this done?" Susan says, "Is it ready to go on the PC banking?" Because that would be the general situation. John would get it loaded and she would approve it, or the other way around. She's saying, "Is it ready to go? I can't see anything to authorize under international." John Smith then says, "Okay, can you find a way around this? I'm very busy. Can I send you the bank details? Can you get it out?" So he's trying to circumvent, or this person, this fake John, is trying to circumvent the process that they have and get her to, I guess, do something different to get the payment in by saying he's too busy and unavailable. Susan then says, "I'll do my best, but I have to go home. It's late. Send me the details and I'll try and sort it out. Maybe get Mary to help. Leave it with us." So bit of success here. John sends the financial details to Susan, and she processes it without following the normal process, and obviously John then has the money, or the fake John. So a few key points for this, and this is something to ideally take back to your teams. And I should say that in all of these cases, it's really easy to look at this and think we are superior when we're looking at an example when we know it's fake, but often these malicious emails come through and we're not expecting them. That sounds obvious, but we're often busy and we glance at them. We don't scrutinize them. And that's when we're often, and maybe we're expecting something. So we're expecting a legitimate request to come through, and that'll come through later. So the key points, and a view of the email address would have revealed the fraud, but we often don't see that because we're not looking for it. Poor use of language is sometimes an issue, as in someone with seemingly poor grammar, maybe poor spelling. A sense of urgency is the big one. Requesting that the procedure or the process in that organization has changed. Any kind of situation where there's no second channel of verification, is going to cause this. So one person being able to get a big payment in and get it approved is usually a problem, because the hacker couldn't do any approval because they didn't have access to the bank. And then the big one is a no question culture. Any situation where the CEO or the owner or the manager of an organization can railroad things through and people are fearful of questioning or asking them something is liable to, well, it has the potential to get you in danger. Continuing on, this one's a little bit more elaborate, so bear with me. And I'm just going to get this up. So this is an example, a customer example of ours that we had to change the naming on. And I was just trying to remember exactly how it went down, because the diagram's a bit unusual. But so what happens is there's two organizations here. There's Weird Wine, which is a wine producer, and there's Great Grapes. Great Grapes provide grapes to Weird Wine to make their wine. So they are a contractor to Weird Wine. So what happened, and this is a real case example with one of our customers. We've obviously changed their names to protect them. Yeah, it's a very interesting one. So Great Grapes had a very basic phishing attack hit them. So the common ones that you may have seen, where you just get an Office 365 email and you click on it and you log in and you'll realize that it's a false one, and your mail address gets spammed and you're hacked, and you're, oh, which embarrassed, and hopefully reset your password. But what this person did was they didn't realize that they'd fallen victim to it, and they kept on working. So the hacker had access to that person's email account, Jenny, or whatever her name is, at Great Grapes' email account. Now, what the hackers did was they watched her activity over 2 months, February to April, when this occurred. They looked at it and saw what was going on over the course of 2 months, and made the contractor, Jenny, not realize that there were any unusual things going on. And so Jenny then, what happened was, it came time for Jenny to send Weird Wine a invoice, and they did. But what the hacker did was stop that invoice from going out. So Jenny thought she sent it, stopped it from going out, blocked it from the Office 365 service, but copied it, and then sent and created a bank account in New Zealand, a Kiwi bank account to be specific, which is weird because apparently Kiwi Bank was allowing people to set up accounts online. So created a bank account in New Zealand. They then went to they then created an invoice and sent it from the Great Grapes account, because they had access to it, that had a new and a different account number. They also sent along a message to Weird Wine and said, we have a new bank account, can you please change your record? Now, Jenny at Great Grapes didn't know this was going on, but it was. Now, what the smartest thing they did was the hacker registered a domain and created a new account with Weird Wine, but they did a minor spelling mistake. It was W-I-E-R-D instead of W-E-I-R-D. So very, to be honest, quite a smart and cunning thing to do, but they registered that domain to create misdirection for the Great Grapes contractor. So anyway, so at this time, Weird Wine has received an invoice and a request to change the banking details. So what happens, just continuing on, the Weird Wine people then respond to Great Grapes and say, we have this, you've sent us this email to change the bank account, are you sure? The hacker stops Jenny at Great Grapes from seeing this email and responds back to Weird Wine and says, from Great Grapes, because they have access to Great Grapes' email account, and says, yes, this is all legit. They then set up the email address, finance at Weird Wine with a slight spelling mistake, as you can see on the left, and send an email to Great Grapes, Jenny, and say, just to let you know, we're having issues with our new finance system. Your payment might be several days late. So the key thing was, the hacker didn't have access to Weird Wine's email, so they couldn't send anything from Weird Wine, but they could from a Weird Wine email address that looked very similar, which they created. So the person, Jenny, looked at that Weird Wine email and thought, oh, that looks all legit. It had the same signature and everything. So Jenny thought, okay, my payment's going to come in a few days late, that'll be fine. Weird Wine sent a remittance to Great Grapes, which was blocked. And so and then made the payment. So they made a payment of something like $60,000 to this new bank account that was set up that was false. And then a day or so later, the fake Weird Wine sent another email to Great Grapes saying your payment will be made in 3 or 4 days. So Jenny thought, okay, I'm getting the payment soon, whatever, that's why I haven't received it by the normal method. A couple of days later, the mail had gone from Kiwi Bank to Australia to Hong Kong, and then it was gone. About 5 days later, Jenny realised what was going on, called Weird Wine and said, hey, where's my money? They said, we've already paid you. So this is what happened. It was very intelligent, and the kernel of this was a simple, basic phishing attempt. So key points: smart thinking from the hacker. They registered a similar domain. They had patience, 2 months, exhibiting no behavior that would give this person any concern. The procedure was changed, and they had no second verification of bank details. And one thing you could take away from here is if you're paying lots of money to suppliers, if they ask you to change the bank account, there should be a phone-based verification. That would have stopped this, because if Weird Wine had called up Great Grapes and said, just want to verify that you want me to change my details, Jenny at Great Grapes would have said, what are you talking about? So I know that was a long example, but it was one that we have seen in the flesh, so to speak, that was very elaborate and showed us what the capability of these people is. So just continuing on, some potential fixes for spear phishing, and we can give more information later. DMARC, or with DKIM, is a method for determining you are getting emails from the people that they say they are. It's a little bit more elaborate than SPF records, but we'll come back to that. Sorry, that's a mistake there. Mail filtering systems, as mentioned before, can improve or reduce you getting these messages actually coming through to you, and user education. Now, we're moving on to ransomware. Not going to spend too much time on this because ransomware is a little bit less common than it was some time ago. But if you've ever seen ransomware before, this is a common image that you may have seen. You have a workstation that receives this lock, usually because you've downloaded a piece of software, and it usually will lock all your files and ask you to pay ransom, the ransom being a Bitcoin, which was probably quite cheap when this thing was recorded, and now can be very, very expensive. So some key things about ransomware. Ransomware was very destructive in the sort of 2011 to 2015 period. Antivirus products or anti-malware products couldn't really stop them. They weren't doing a good job. And the reason is that the encryption files, they didn't the application. So this virus, if you'd call it that, the ransomware tool, it wasn't installing itself onto the computer, and that was a common reason why antivirus systems or anti-malware systems picked up on viruses. They would try and embed themselves in the operating system, whereas the ransomware just ran almost like a file that was almost like a basic application that was opening a document. And what it would do is it would open every document on your computer and encrypt it, and so you couldn't access it. Now, I can tell you that in the earlier days, the IT team had to pay some ransoms. We had some customers with personal situations that lost a lot of photos. And so we had to go through the elaborate process of paying Bitcoin to these unusual people that took our money and ran. And it works, and that's the key thing. And I don't know if I should be saying this, but generally the key business model is that if people pay, they get their files back. And so it's in their interests for it to work, and generally it does. Just a couple of, I won't go into too much detail about how they work, but generally the impact of ransomware is it's a huge recovery effort. It takes a very little time for them to be encrypted, but it takes a long time for them to be unencrypted or recovering the backups. And it can, and usually the organization is completely crippled because no one can access any documents. So it is quite damaging. There's a couple of things you can do in mitigation. There's a bit of risk. If you have an RDP system that's open to the world, you could be at higher risk than you think. But yeah, there's a few points here. If you're interested, feel free to ask us and we'll get this information around. Social engineering, I won't spend much time on this, but this is when you get a call from someone pretending to be from Microsoft India. They're Microsoft or Intel, frequently from India, and they're often, and over here you'd hear it in the news, targeting older people that don't know as much, and trying to make them think that they're from a legitimate source trying to fix their computer and taking hundreds of dollars from them. It's pretty terrible what they're doing, and it does still exist. Webcam extortion scams. So some of you may have seen an image like this. It's a little bit amusing if you read the text, but it generally is saying that they've got video footage of you and you need to pay money. What they do that's most interesting though, is they usually send out an email to you saying, we have your password, and the password is often legit. And you're like, hold on, that is my password. And I'll explain where they get it from in a moment. So usually people look at it and think, oh my God, there might be a breach going on here. And then they use that to get money. Now, they haven't actually hacked your computer. They've gotten your password from a different breach, but it's a cunning way to try and get people to believe that they're legit. So, and if you have had this, just delete it, ignore it. Don't reply to them, just delete it. So, third-party site credential breach. This is a very common way that you may have, without realizing it, already had your data accessed. So LinkedIn, MySpace, Adobe, MyFitnessPal, and many others are breaches that have existed, and you may have some data in there. And there's tons of them. They generally get stored on the dark web, and I'll come back to that in a moment. And hackers are using those to try and access your other services, called I think it's called a cross breach. So what we're going to do is we're going to put up a little, before we put up the poll, I'm going to ask everyone to go to this website. So this is a very legitimate site, I need to say, and it's a tool that we sometimes use, and it's quite valuable. And it's created by an a cybersecurity specialist, and it has some information. And I'd suggest you could use this or talk to your colleagues about it. But this is not a trick. I'm not trying to get people here and say, you shouldn't go to any websites. Please go to this website, have I been owned with a p.com, and enter your email address. It's not going to ask you to enter anything else, just your email address, and it's not going to sign you up to anything. So it's created by an Australian web security expert called Troy Hunt, and it is an interesting thing to see if any publicly known organizations have been breached that have your email. Feel free to use your business email address or your personal email address. So please, if you're willing and keen, and I've got stuff that's been breached, so I'll talk about mine as well. Please go to this website while we're waiting and plug your email address in there, and we're going to do a poll, and you can tell us a little bit about your results. We'll just wait 30 seconds for people to do that, or 20 seconds. You can get the poll up when you want to, Chloe. This site's been around for a long time. I think I first encountered it about 7 years ago, and it did help us to understand just the scope of the type of breaches that are out there, and a lot of people will put their email in, and if they've had it for several years, will find that they have their data at some level has been breached. Okay, so we have green, no breaches known. Congratulations, that's good. Red, so 56% of people had 5 or less breaches. 6% had 6 or more breaches, and 12% decided not to do it, which I understand. The 56% have 5 or less breaches. It is quite, surprising to know that you have these breaches, and you might not have been aware. I'd expect that there's a good chunk of people might not have even known they had that account, because sometimes it's something like Adobe. But now you know, and I would suggest if you realize that you've had this breach and you haven't changed your password sometime, you should change it, because what they're trying to do, usually when they breach that site, and sometimes they get a password and sometimes they don't, but when they get a password, they then use that on other services, your email account, if it's a Gmail account or Office 365, whatever else they can find. And so it's using that data. Just continuing on, so as I said, potential remedies for this situation. We'd always say if you realize you got your details breached, or you hear of a service that you subscribe to, if you have a Fitbit and you hear tomorrow that Fitbit's breached, the first thing you should do is change your password, and if you use that password or similar variations to other services, all other services. That's the idea of what you should do there, because they do have, it can move very quickly. Dark web monitoring is something you can do, and I'll give a little bit more info on that. If you're using a password manager, potentially make some changes to the top level password key. And multi-factor authentication for your key services is always very powerful. If you're using something like Xero for your accounting, an online tool, it's a good one. Multi-factor authentication on that can be very helpful. Dark web, a little bit of information on here. Dark web monitoring is something that can be done, and it effectively monitors so what often happens is when a hack like those Adobe ones or whatever else occur, the people that hack it will take it and store it on the dark web for other hackers to buy or access. And so dark web monitoring waits for data to be uploaded, and then we'll see if your details or your organizational details are in there. If anyone would like me to do a report on their organization for free, no cost at all, no strings attached or anything, I am able to do that and send it to you if the TechSoup ladies are happy for me to do that. I'll continue on. Just a little wee note that we found on privacy, just an amusing image for data harvesting. I'm sure a lot of you may have seen colleagues or maybe filled these out yourselves on Facebook. You might see someone post, oh, I wonder if anyone will reply to this, or I wish more people do this. Key thing is, stop sending your potential passwords or memorable data to people who collect this for social engineering. These posts that circulate on Facebook and social media are created by people trying to gather information, maybe for password hacking or for other reasons, but they are there to harvest data. So do not put it in there. It's not for fun, or it wasn't created for fun. Moving on, last poll. Do you want to check that up, Chloe? Okay, so is your organization fully working from home? I think this is maybe the second to last poll, isn't it, Chloe?
Yeah, that's right.
Thank you. Okay, so we're fully working from home, 48%. Most of the staff are working from home, 44%. We are not working from home, 7%. So this next segment will largely apply to most of us here, most of the attendees. So just boxing through. So remote working, this is the current situation. Or things that are of concern, I should say. So personal workstations. If you and your organization have staff that are using personal workstations, this could be a threat. VPNs, especially if you're using personal or shared workstations, can be a threat. Firewalls and basic security settings on a home machine, if you have them, are a threat. Workstations that are not on a domain, if you have a company domain, organization / your username, and machines are not on them, they are a threat. If you don't have MFA for something like Office 365 or Teams, this is a threat you should consider. And if you have personal devices that are accessing company networks like a shared drive and you've set that up to do that, that is also a bit of a threat that you need to consider. So, because often they'll have no antivirus installed or little security, or the kids are downloading and playing Fortnite and downloading apps and stuff like that, and it is a risk. Just continuing on, what are we likely to see in the remote working environment? We are likely to see, as I talked about before, and it's going to continue, targeted phishing attempts related to remote working. And this is, you've seen the COVID ones, but there's going to be more and more of these. Services like Zoom, which are rampant, and there's been massive growth in Zoom, are likely to be particularly vulnerable. And it's not Zoom that's vulnerable, it's the users, because they're going to be sending out fake Zoom phishing attacks that look like they're real meetings, and people are just going to click on them, because the way that Zoom sends out their emails, they're very basic, very text-based, and extremely imitatable. So I'm not saying you should be concerned about Zoom, it's just be concerned about what you're receiving. And generally speaking, and this is what we're going to cover on soon, more isolation, because everyone's in more isolation, they are more likely to fall victim. Things for you to consider and ask yourself: is sensitive data, so if you're a not-for-profit that deals with sensitive data of clients or contacts or users or maybe patients? Is that data as secure and in the same locations as it was when you're in your office? Maybe people are using shared devices and they're pulling down attachments. That data could be sensitive and it might be against your contracts if you have them, or against the Privacy Act for you to store that data in places where they shouldn't be. Storing business docs on personal workstations is ultimately going to create that sensitive data issue, and you need to consider it. And then rapidly set up Teams, SharePoint, Dropbox instances are likely to be less secure if you went about a proper project to do it. I'm not saying that people have security issues in those services. It's just if you've rapidly done it, you might not have done the permissions well, and you might need to take a closer look at it at some point. A few key things around remote working and isolation. So as I said before, the key thing is users are isolated. When they're in an office environment, they've got people around them, they're more likely to be able to ask for help. Slide your chair over and say, hey, have you seen this email? Or does this look legit? Or I'm just about to do this thing. You know, that's the type of thing that happens in an office. And when you're at home, are people, if they see a bad email, are they likely to do a video call with someone and share that with their colleague and say, can you see this email? Does it look bad? The reality is they're probably not going to do that because it seems like such an effort, and it is quite a bit of an effort, and they might not want to look stupid, whereas just asking their peer to look at something is different, and it's casually what we're used to. The natural chatter, so if an organization receives an email that's got a dodgy message or a phishing attack, they're kind of likely someone's going to say, oh, did anyone else receive this? And then someone before they're about to click on it will go, oh, actually, yes, they're going to be a bit more on guard. And so the natural chatter can actually help security, and we're not going to have that. It's going to be difficult in your organizations to see when a user is struggling as much as another one with the tools, and then they are more likely to be a victim, to be fair, of a breach if they are struggling. Say you've deployed a new tool like Teams or Zoom, some users might be struggling and you're just not going to realize that they need more help. Now, this is a big one. Approvals are more likely to be via email than before. So when you're in your office and you need to sign off, maybe there's a purchase, someone needs to purchase something new, piece of equipment, whatever. Traditionally, you might get physical sign off. You might ask someone in person to verify, are you happy for us to purchase that? More and more often, as we're working remotely, the approvals will be email-based, and email-based approvals are more susceptible to things like, well, phishing attempts, the imitations of those. They're more susceptible to interception, and so email-based approvals, while they are good for efficiency, there is a little bit of a security concern there. And then just generally in emergency situations, we're setting things up and we're trying to deal with what's going on. But at a certain point, we need to go, we've been here for 4 weeks or 5 weeks working from home. Is it now time to look and go, okay, that temporary measure that we put in place, do we need to just check and make sure we've done it right? Some quick wins. If you're using home workstations, if home workstations are in use in your organization, make sure they've got AV, make sure they're up to date, make sure the firewalls are enabled, and ideally use separate accounts. Big one, get MFA working. I'm going to skim through these just because we are a bit light on time. Consider policies for your organizations and staff. And what I mean by that is you might want to create a policy that suggests what they can and can't do with your data, and it just helps to protect you and maybe create awareness with the user. Key thing is encourage check-ins and verifications, and it allows people to chatter about these types of things. Encourage sharing of experience. If someone gets a potentially dodgy email, encourage them to share that type of thing. Someone gets a weird call from someone trying to pretend to be someone else, encourage them to share it. It's more likely to kind of create a herd immunity, so to speak. Shouldn't have said that. Video conferencing, I'll brush through this very quickly. Zoom, Teams, Skype, Messenger, as in Facebook Messenger and WhatsApp are all very broadly used. Zoom is huge these days. If you bought shares in Zoom last year, you're probably going to be a very rich person. If they sell shares, I don't know. 10 million daily users in 2019, 200 million now. Extraordinary, and it will be bigger. Key thing about Zoom is rapid uptake, and generally all these systems, rapid uptake, easy to get started, not much training needed to get started, but struggling users are now more isolated, and the issues with tech and lack of security awareness are heightened. Zoom bombing, So Zoom bombing is a big thing. If you're using Zoom, you might have heard about this. It's when people, if they get your Zoom ID or they guess your Zoom ID, can jump into your meeting without a password, and it wasn't easy to put a password on until very recently. Boris Johnson had a meeting and he posted this image on his Twitter, and it had the ID in the upper left corner, and people started to jump in on the cabinet meeting. Quite embarrassing for Boris Johnson, amongst other things. They have made, I won't read all of these, but they have made changes to increase security, including, and they're going to continue to, because Zoom's come under a lot of heat, to get the default setting to require passwords, which does help, and a waiting room feature. Teams, what about Teams? Well, Teams is not as big as Zoom, and since it's a cornerstone of Office 365, it requires the same password, so you're less likely to have a username and password that is, I guess, left outside the common security system. So in Office 365, you'll have a password and you'll probably reset it frequently, and you might have MFA. Whereas if you've got Zoom over here, it might be different, and you might have the same password for a very long time, which isn't great. So there's more chances of there being a security issue. Okay, a few things you can do, and I'm going to go through these a little bit quicker than I would like. But some of them are obvious. Install secure protection measures for you. Installing security updates is always a very good idea. Secure your devices with something like an anti-malware system. Now, anti-malware is no longer as helpful as it was in the 2000s because it's not really for stopping phishing attempts and those type of security threats, but it is still a powerful tool that you should have, and it's often free. Something like Avast, even the Windows Defender system that's built into Windows 10 is free. Back up your data. Even though some of the tools out there are cloud-based and therefore they have their own built-in backups, it is always good to have your own backup somehow, or a third-party backup. Network. Making sure your network is secure, not having open wireless is something that's more applicable for the office, but it can be an issue at home as well. Logging access, if you don't have Office 365 logging enabled, it could be a problem later on, so I'd consider you do that. And updating your default credentials. Whatever system you're doing, if you have default credentials, it could be a risk. Happy to provide more information on that separately to this webinar. Some other protection measures, and I mentioned them earlier. No matter how well you prepare, things can go wrong. Plan beforehand. Think your organization, if you're a decent sized organization, you should consider having a breach plan. What happens if we have a breach? These various things. What happens if a laptop falls off the back of a truck? What happens if someone legitimately breaks into our server or our data? What is your plan? One thing you should ask and encourage and have as a policy, and make sure people are aware of it, is staff have to notify if they have a potential breach or a loss of data. They have to notify. It's not uncommon, we find, for people to keep it quiet or think that it's not a big deal or think that they've handled it by resetting their password. It's important that they notify, and there is a place to put this. Response plan, have a response plan. And in Australia, it is illegal, my understanding, to, well, if you have a breach, you have to notify, compulsory notification, or there's a big fine. This is something that is coming to New Zealand as well. And I think you need to have a plan around that notification. Have the templates for how you're going to notify and who you will likely notify ready, so that it doesn't take you 5 days to get it out there. It's important to have this plan. And it's harder to get this in place when we're doing remote working, but it's even more important. Requiring notifications from staff. You can imagine in your office, if someone has a breach, it's just gonna get out there. But if they are at home and they have a small breach, accidentally access a website that they didn't mean to, or enter their details into a fake Office 365, there's a good chance, just by not realizing the severity of it, that they wouldn't tell anyone. But it's the same level of threat. Okay, protection measures just quickly that we're going through here. MFA, effectively, these are 2 slides that cover a few things, but MFA and DKIM, DKIM, DMARC are very powerful tools that you can use. Feel free to ask us or your IT provider for more information on those. DNS filtering is very powerful. 365 backup is something that you could consider. It does cost money, but you can look for a few different options and ideally find a cheap one. Using Azure AD, if you don't have any kind of domain, can can be very helpful for your security, and even especially in a remote working environment, because you can effectively secure those devices even if they're not in your office. Just continuing on, a few things to consider: minimize your personal workstations. This is a big one. Consider user training even in this environment, can be very powerful. And the big one is work on a culture, increasingly while you're remote, of security and training. So it's, as we said, a lot of these cases were amplified when people didn't tell, when people were scared of challenging certain people in authority about the behavior that they could be doing, and often it wasn't even them that were doing it. So creating that culture is important. Now, training, consider your wider team. People are the weakest point. It's just the weakest point of security. It's not the tools, it's not the system, it's usually the people. And most organizations have been the victim of phishing attempts. Have a culture of questioning, of course, as mentioned before. Train on the at-home risks and train on the different type of threats. Phishing simulators can be really good educators, something to consider, and individual classroom style sessions can be valuable as well. Right, question time. I've got a couple of questions before we get to question time, there's a few quick questions I'll run through here, quick answers. So the single most impactful thing you could do today to help your organization, if you don't have it on most of your systems, MFA. Go away from this. If you don't have it or you're not sure, go away and try and find out, or ask us or ask TechSoup, how can I get MFA enabled on my Office 365, Xero, and other accounts? It is very, very helpful. Will we recommend Teams or Zoom for remote working, remote conferencing? I think Teams ideally, but still Zoom is a very good tool. How important is antivirus? Not nearly as important as it was 10 years ago, but you should still have one. How important is DNS filtering like Cisco Umbrella? More important than antivirus, but not as important as MFA, but it is a very good shield, and we should recommend it. And what about backups and Office 365 backups? Backups are very important. Office 365 backups, there is a good chance if you have an issue with Office 365, your data will be protected by Office 365, but we would recommend having it if your data is sensitive and precious, really. All right, question time. Sorry, team, viewers, and Chloe and Tina ran a bit over time, but hopefully we still have some time for some questions.
It's all good. Very useful and information there, Conan. There's one question that you didn't answer in that little summary questions. It's come from Alan. He's asked, is Windows 10 security measures sufficient, or do you require a third-party software?
I would say for the traditional malware software, Windows don't, not going to put my life on it, but I would say that Windows Defender is, 9 out of 10 for security, for a free option. And I personally, if I don't have anything really, really precious on my machine, and that's a challenge. I've got, OneDrive syncs data, but that is also protected. I would probably say that Windows 10 Defender, which is built into Windows 10, is pretty good, and I'd be happy with it personally. We, as an organization, when we're rolling out antivirus to customers, we use a different tool because it allows us to make sure that it's operating and up to date, and so it's about control. But if you're an individual or a small organization with Windows 10 Defender, it is pretty good. But it doesn't protect you against things like phishing. It's not going to be great against ransomware. It's not going to stop things coming through your email. So you need to consider your inbound security, not just your desktop security.
Cool. We've actually just received one more question from John. He's asked, how important is hardware security when staff or volunteers are working from home?
So hardware security, I'm not sure exactly what you're referring to, John. I'll take a guess. I'm assuming if you're meaning hardware security, if you're talking about operating system security, it could be similar to the question we've just had, having a piece of software on the machine as opposed to filtering. And yes, it is important. Hardware security, as far as restricting things like, when we talk about hardware security, we talk about ability to plug in things like pen drives that have malware on them, and we sometimes put locks to stop pen drives from being accessed by the average user. If I haven't answered this correctly, please feel free to email through or put a chat and I can answer that separately via email. just a little bit more information would be helpful. Sorry about that,
He
John.
said hardware firewalls, etc., but
Oh,
he's also
excuse me.
asked a follow-up question. He said he's finding it a bit challenging to enforce MFA since the volunteer team are not tech-savvy people. Are there any tips for him?
It's a tough one, John. So firstly, hardware security. Look, firewalls are beneficial, but ultimately, what's happened is the most likely types of attacks are no longer these brute force attacks on people's firewall, trying to get worms through the firewall, trying to access ports that they can't. Protection on those is it's just not as common. If you're an organization with 100 staff, you should have a good firewall. 50 staff, maybe 30 staff, maybe 20 staff, you could have a good firewall, but it's not going to stop phishing attempts. It's kind of like people are, you can put great protection on your door, but nowadays people are going through the cat door around the back, and so you've got to protect that. And the second question around the MFA, it is a real challenge, John, on the MFA, getting users to do it. And the best thing I could suggest is trying to use the situation as best you can to make maybe take advantage of the situation to try and get users to adopt it more than they would, because it is a bit of a state of an emergency. And more training, some examples, maybe roll out to some champions. Our common thing is we encourage people in teams to ask for volunteers. Who's technically capable in the organization that wants to take part in a new system we're doing to improve security? Get 6 or 7 people if you've got an organization of 50 and get them to use it, and ideally explain to them the importance of what they're doing, that they are there to try and be part of it, and also explain to people once they do it and are happy with it, that it is going to be good and it is worthwhile, and kind of use them to broadcast that good message. It's not perfect. There's probably some other things we could come up with, John. I might ask my team, and if they have some cool ideas, we'll put it out on the follow-up.
Thank you, Connor. We've got a couple of quick questions. These are probably the last 2 we'll do. One is, what are your thoughts on MS-ATP?
Microsoft Advanced Threat Protection. You had me for a second there. Look, it is. We like it. We think it's good. The key thing about ATP is we use it in conjunction with something called Cisco Umbrella, which I encourage you to look up. And I think OpenDNS version might be partially free. And those two tend to have a big effect on the potential threats that users can have. There's still a lot more that you can go into. It doesn't create a perfect shield, but it does go a long way. Microsoft Advanced Threat Protection is very good at stopping malware. And if you configure it well, there is some key configuration that is not enabled by default. It can be exceptional at stopping phishing attempts. If you would like more information on that, I'm happy to connect you up to one of my engineers can send you some information, and you can potentially go back and forth with them, because it is not as obvious as you would think. Out of the box, ATP is worth it for the anti-malware sandboxing tool it has, but when you drill into it, it can be very powerful. So we give it a thumbs up considering the price.
Awesome. And then the final question I think we've got time for is from Lisa. Would you recommend having a remote desktop solution, e.g. TeamViewer, to resolve IT issues for teams working remotely?
Yes. Look, I think it is fine. TeamViewer, it has a bit of built-in security there that people, depending on how it's configured, can't just jump into the machine. I always think that TeamViewer is so popular that it's likely at some point to come under threat from some sort of cyber attack. That you shouldn't take that you shouldn't use it. I generally think TeamViewer is a good product to use for that, so it's a yes.
And that was a very quick question. So the last question, how valuable are programs like LastPass and 1Password for organizations? That's from Sally.
They can be very powerful for organizations for holding on to passwords and creating a level of security. They can also pose a bit of a risk if people don't react and reset and change passwords if there is a breach. So I think they are valuable, but you have to understand when there can be an issue. They can actually become a bit of a liability. So thumbs up, but you need to be careful if you do have a breach.
Wonderful. That's all our questions today. Do you have anything else to wrap up before I finish off the session,
Um,
Conan?
Look, I think if you have any questions, we're happy to, or other questions, we're happy to. Feel free to send to that email address. We like to help, and so we can shoot through some answers. If you're concerned about where to start, how can you apply MFA to your Office 365 account? If you're doing this all yourself, it can be daunting. Do feel free to ask us, and we can try and send you in the right direction. But yeah, I think in the current environment, we're all doing more and more remote working. It is going to evolve, and there will be threats that are trying to target us, and it is going to be a shame. Things like, as the user said before, TeamViewer, things like Zoom, trying to take advantage of the inexperience of people and how they're working with these tools. So we need to be on our feet. I'd say encourage chatter. Try and find the weaker links in your organization. That sounds really bad. Try and find the weaker links to your organization and how you can train them. Maybe set up a 30-minute session with staff sometime in early May to say, and do it online, because that's a good way to do it, and say, are you all aware of the different security cases out there, and find some examples. Happy to take ours, because we'll be sending the slides as well. And if you feel like you'd like more content, then feel free to contact us, of course. So yeah, that's what I'd say.
Thank you, Conan. That was a really great session and provided some really great examples and tips for everyone.
Thanks.
And thank you to everyone for joining us today as well. I hope you learned a lot from the presentation and that we answered all of your questions so far. If you do have any other questions that come to mind later on, or any feedback about this webinar, please send that through to events@connectingup.org, and we'll get that
Cool.
through to Conan and his team too, if you don't want to follow through with that email as well, direct, that he's given you.
Cool.
Don't forget that the recording also today will be available on our website very shortly, and we'll actually send you a link directly as well, so keep an eye out on your inbox. And again, thank you for being with us. Enjoy the rest of your day, stay safe, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Thank
Cool.
you.
Thank you.